Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Pudge's Ring Reviews. And let's get right into it. As I said, we're gonna tackle documentaries, movies, TV shows, whatever. And we're starting off hot with the Vince McMahon docuseries on Netflix entitled Mr. McMahon. And I just noticed that I didn't mention the name of the first episode in the last episode, which was Junior, which, if you're in the know, you know he hated being called that. So as I said, let's get right into the fire, so to speak. And this is episode 2, entitled Heat. And so right away, the cold open is it's a classic moment of Vince McMahon at the Slammies from 1987, the Slammy Awards. And he's performing in front of the crowd, and he's performing Stand Back, which that was off the very, very, I want to say iconic album, Pile Driver. I tend to think that Pile Driver was better than the first wrestling album. That's just me. The first wrestling album was more wrestlers just singing songs. The second one, they were singing songs, but they were songs that ended up becoming their theme songs. But anyway, very, very classic. And then you think about Stand Back. Now, I don't know if he wrote it or it was written for him. I don't know if it was a real song, because they did re-record real songs and just redo them. But the lyrics kind of go with Vince McMahon, talking to other promoters and stuff. So anyway, if you've never seen it, seek it out. Type it in. Go on YouTube. Vince McMahon Stand Back. It is a sight to see. All right. So in episode 2, they start off talking about how WrestleMania was such a great success, and how they're going to capitalize on that. Now they started having Saturday night's main event, and that was such a huge deal to be on network television. I believe, I don't know if it was once a month. I know it wasn't, they would have them here and there sporadically, but definitely it was it was a pretty big deal. I mean, to replace Saturday Night's Live, which was a huge show at the time too. And I know that, was it Lorne Michaels is the guy? He was not happy every time Saturday Night Live got bumped for Saturday night's main event. But, they talk about how the business was blowing up. But it was, on the back of the boys, all the wrestlers. These guys were wrestling over 300 days a year, a lot of them. And the schedule was so grueling. And they kind of talk about how the schedule is a lot better now. Guys get a lot more time off. But even an extra part to that is they didn't have the technology that they have today. I'm sure back then a guy could be booked in Boston, and then he's booked in Utah, and then he's booked in Florida. So you're going all over the place. Where now they might do loops in areas and stuff. I don't think it was as coordinated back then. So these guys are all over the place. They're doing all these shows, sometimes twice a day, sometimes even 3 times a day, 4 or 5 times on the weekends. I mean, the house show business was huge then, compared to now, where it's more of a television business, and the house shows it was kind of the opposite. And your television was to build up the house shows, and now it's kind of your house shows are kind of to build up the TV shows. So so they just kind of talk about how the road was brutal back then, and if guys wouldn't take time off, if a guy was injured, they'd still be on the road, and they might be afraid that their spot would be taken, and if you didn't wrestle back then, you didn't get paid. It's not like now where, the guys are on guaranteed contracts and stuff. These guys, they were not on guaranteed contracts. They were on handshake deals a lot of the time, and they were, the big thing is that I always said Vince didn't give me a guarantee. He gave me he gave me a handshake deal of 10 dates and a certain amount of money, and then after that, whatever. So through all that, right before WrestleMania 2, Jesse the Body Ventura wanted to start a wrestlers union. And there was some scuttle about that, and I guess, he figured at around WrestleMania time would be the time to do it, because you could really stick it to Vince. He wants to do WrestleMania 2, but hey, we're not doing it unless we have this or that, blah, blah, blah. And, Hogan got wind of it and snitched to Vince McMahon. He admits it in this series here. Yeah, I heard about it. I went and told Vince. Now, you're going to think, like, a couple things. One, these guys, I don't think a wrestlers union is ever going to happen. And I don't think guys on the top would want a union. Yeah, I mean, the benefit would be the health insurance. But, say like Hogan, he's making so much money. Does he really want to, does he care if Barry O is making whatever he's making? No, they don't care. So, like, for the guys at the bottom, a union works out great. For the guys at the top, they're not interested in a union. They don't want to share their money. And, Jesse Ventura's, they said Jesse the Body Ventura, he never knew who ratted him out. And they said Vince called in all these guys and no one would show up to admit that they're trying to start a union. And Jesse said he never knew who ratted him out. And so it wasn't until Jesse's lawsuit, I want to say it was like 92, 93. I can't remember the year. But it was for, they were using, he was suing for royalties, using his voice on videotapes and whatnot. And in the deposition, you can ask whatever you wanted. And Jesse told his lawyer, and it kind of a genius move. He told his lawyer, ask him who dimed out that Jesse was going to start trying to start a union. And Vince McMahon said right away, Hulk Hogan. And Jesse was like, I was disgusted. I was sick to my stomach. And there was always heat between Jesse and Hogan. I mean, number one, they look similar. They're both patterned themselves after superstar Billy Graham. And there was always like that kind of heat, like who's the bigger star. They played it up a lot on TV, but you could tell it was also pretty much a legit thing too. So so Jesse, I guess Jesse said I'd never wanted to talk to him again. And then when Jesse was in WCW and Hogan went over there, a little fast forward, Hogan went over there, Jesse was gone, I think, a month before or a month after Hogan got there. So there was never really any crossover there either. So, and that would have been after Jesse found out about Hogan diming him out for the union thing. So they talk about how WrestleMania 2 was insane because Vince was like, how are we going to make WrestleMania 2 bigger than WrestleMania 1? And they came up with the concept of doing 3 shows in one day. One in Chicago, one in New York, and one in Los Angeles. And they just talked about how it was big, but it wasn't as big as WrestleMania 1. And it was kind of like a cluster, very hard to do technology-wise. And they were like, yeah, we'll never do this again. But like I said, as big as WrestleMania 2 was, it wasn't what WrestleMania 1 was. And then they kind of just jump right into, okay, so what am I going to do for WrestleMania 3? And he talked about wanting to have it be huge. And you got the Pontiac Silverdome. And he's saying, like, that holds however many thousand people. We'll get into that. But it holds however many thousand people. And, what could be the attraction? I could fill this up with the right attraction. And they thought of Hogan versus Andre. And it's like, okay, how are we going to sell this match? Well, Vince came up with the idea of, let's sell it like it's never happened before. So, this is something that happens quite often in WWF. The way of thinking of, or the way of doing business of pretending, revisionist history in a way. Things never happened. So they acted as if it never happened. And, I don't think it's a big deal that you do that. I think if it builds the story up, so why not, And so they wanted to act like it never happened, and then Andre was gone at the time. He was filming The Princess Bride, which, his character in that movie, fantastic. If you don't get hit in the heart with that, they said how much he loved doing it, and man, anytime I watch that movie, it's a good movie. I remember anytime you watch that movie, it really hits you right in the feels. And so Vince said he went and talked to Andre while he was filming it, and talking about WrestleMania 3, trying to sell him, and he said, here's how we can do it. We'll have you turn heel and work Hogan. And there was talk of an operation. They were in this documentary. They were saying he had to talk him into having the operation to have the match. But I could be wrong. I thought that he had the operation after the match. I know his back was in such bad shape. They talk a little bit about that. We'll get into that. But they say, okay, he had his operation and then came and had the match. Then they show a hype reel of WrestleMania 3. It's funny because during the hype reel, now we'll get into what I was talking about with the attendance. Every wrestler says 93,000. Oh, we had 93,000. Every wrestler says 93,000. And then Negative Nancy, Dave Meltzer comes on, and he's like, well, it was really only 78,000 people. And it's like, Meltzer just has always, they don't even realize what an inside joke it is. He comes on and he says this, and it's just like, man, you will die. Put that on your tombstone. Now, in my opinion, 78,000 is an impressive number alone. I don't know why they added the amount on. It's wrestling. You can add whatever. You can say whoever. You could say 10 million people were there. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And so I don't know why Dave Meltzer really cares that much, but he'll die on that hill. And so WrestleMania 3 was built on Hogan and Andre. They drew the crowd. Everyone was there to see that match. Was it the best match on the show? No, not per se, but you had other matches on that show that were fantastic. Like you had Macho Man versus Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, which will go down. It's one of my favorite matches of all time. Not just because the match was great, the story leading into it was great. A lot of people will say, no, it's not the greatest because they wrote out everything they were going to do. Look, I don't care. It's still a great match. You know what? It takes a skill to just remember that stuff. So, what I watched was fantastic. How they got that result, me personally, I don't care. I don't care that it was planned out. I've done matches where, no, I've never really planned out the whole match. Planned out some spots, but it doesn't matter to me that it was planned out. That doesn't take away from it being a fantastic match. But with that being said, it doesn't matter. That match will not be as big as Hogan Andre. When you talk about WrestleMania 3, you will always think of Hogan Andre first. They drew the card, and that's a fact. Whatever anyone wants to say, that's just a fact. And the narrative that I'm so tired of hearing, and Hogan has always stuck to this. I didn't know if Andre was going to do the honors. I didn't know if he was going to put me over. And they keep playing up that, don't worry, Andre will do the right thing. And Hogan didn't know, and he was scared. And during the match, Hogan didn't know. And during the match, Andre called Slam, and Hogan slammed him. And they asked him in this, when did you know that you were going over? And he said, when I did. You know what, man? I cannot believe that. There's no way that in this match, the biggest match of all time at this point, that they're going to go into that risking not knowing if Hogan was going to go over. That's impossible to me. It's impossible. And, I was going to say something about Meltzer. I don't know. Again, going back to Hogan said, he realized how bad Andre's back was. So they ended up. Meltzer comes on again. Now I know what I was gonna say. Sorry for that little brain fart there. But Meltzer came on. And the guy's just so negative about everything. Like, this is a guy who's supposed to love this business. I'll get into Meltzer in a second. I'll give my opinions on him. But, he comes on and he's like, oh, well, the narrative is supposed to be that Andre's passing the torch. When in reality, Hogan was already a bigger star. Yeah, but you know what? You needed Hogan to beat Andre to solidify that. Yes, Hogan was the guy at the time, but beating Andre was like, now he is the mountaintop. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Let me get into Meltzer a little bit. That I don't know. The guy, this is his life, wrestling, and he's always so negative about so many things, unless it's something he likes. Then Meltzer, he did the 5-star rating stuff, and this match is 5 stars, this match is 2 stars. When he started to lose credibility with that is when he started putting matches at like, oh, this is a negative 2-star match, and this is getting into some of these matches today in New Japan, like that's 7 stars. Well, you've built your whole career on the 5-star system now, and guys from today are getting more 5-star matches than some of the greatest wrestlers of all time. I don't ever go by his ranking system. To me, he's just a guy, just like me. He likes what he likes. I like what I like. Because he thinks a match is 5 stars doesn't mean I have to think it's 5 stars. It doesn't mean because I don't like that match, he's right and I'm wrong. It's just his opinion. Where I do like Meltzer is he's a historian. The guy knows everything about wrestling. So, that's just how I feel about Meltzer. He really is into AEW now. He has a certain style he likes, and that's fine. So, that's what I wanted to say about Meltzer. They start talking about, after Hogan beat Andre, how much of a megastar he became. And again, that he beat Andre. He beat the Dragon, so to speak. And it's interesting. Stephanie comes on, and says she felt resentment that Vince never got the credit. Only Hogan was getting the credit. And it's like, well, you're the creator. I don't know. I don't agree with that. Vince never put it out there that he was the owner. He wasn't like on TV. I don't think I knew he was the owner until late mid-90s. My dad told me that once, that he was the owner. So if you're not even putting it out there yourself, you're not looking for the credit. I don't think Vince ever was like, oh man, I'm not getting the credit for this. He's getting paid. That's the credit, right? That's the credit. They start showing like, now wrestling's jumping off. All the wrestling figures, the LJNs, the Hulk Hogan weight set. There was a hotline. Everyone was talking about how Vince was a workaholic. And so then, this would have been like 87-ish. Then they kind of just gloss over WrestleMania 4 and 5, and they start talking about, Hogan started to get the itch for Hollywood. He wanted to go into Hollywood. Vince didn't want to lose him to Hollywood, so Vince was like, hey, you want to make a movie? Well, let's make a movie. So they wrote No Holds Barred. And I don't think they give themselves enough credit, because they're all on there and they're like, it wasn't that great. It wasn't good. I think it was better than what they are giving it. Was it the greatest movie of all time? No. But it wasn't bad. I mean, it was good for what it was. I mean, I guess it didn't do too well at the movie theater, but it really did well on VHS. I know when it came out on VHS, and I went to rent it, there was a waiting list. You had to wait to get it. Yes, kids, there was an actual store we went to rent movies. It wasn't just like now where things become streaming or go on Netflix or whatever streaming service. You had to go to the store and rent a movie, and you got it for 1, 2, maybe 3 days. Eventually, they started doing 7 days or whatever. And, you had to actually wait to get it because someone else might have it. So I was actually on the waiting list for No Holds Barred. And I'm not going to get into reviewing reviewing No Holds Barred can be another episode, but I think it was better than what it was. There was the talk of that Hogan and Vince rewrote it one weekend in a hotel room, and they were all coked up when they did it. Okay. And then they do show the clip, the infamous, "What's that smell?" Which is Vince McMahon voicing that part. So it's interesting that that's the part they show. So now, after No Holds Barred and all that, they start talking about how Hulkamania started to fade. And WrestleMania 6 was coming up, and what were they going to do? And Ultimate Warrior was on the rise. Hogan's like, yeah, his colors were brighter, this or that. He was a little faster. So Hogan said, I did what Andre did for me. I passed the torch. The thing about that is very different. When Andre did it, he did it. When Hogan did it, he did it. But then he had to give Ultimate Warrior, he handed him the belt, put the attention on him handing the belt to Warrior. When he was leaving in the little cart, they made sure to show Hogan leaving and saluting the Ultimate Warrior. So they kind of put a lot of attention on Hogan leaving as opposed to Warrior winning the belt. And then, the problems with Warrior, he didn't draw as well as Hogan did. He wasn't as well liked in the back as Hogan was, and it just wasn't working out. So they wanted to bring Hogan back. I had heard rumors that they were going to turn Warrior heel. Back then, it never happened. So anyway, what ended up happening was Sergeant Slaughter came back. Now Slaughter was one of the biggest baby faces right around the time Hogan came in originally. Mr. USA there, the drill sergeant, Mr. G.I. Joe. He left WWF because G.I. Joe wanted to do stuff with him, and Vince was like, no, we got the contract with LJN, and Slaughter ended up leaving. And he chose G.I. Joe over WWF. And you know what? I think it worked out for him in the long run. Because now, even in his old age now, when he goes and does conventions, he can do conventions as Sergeant Slaughter the wrestler, or he can do Sergeant Slaughter as Mr. G.I. Joe. And that's basically what he is. He was the first real human G.I. Joe. In the end, they started doing like the refrigerator and stuff like that, but Sergeant Slaughter was that first G.I. Joe. But the difference bringing him back now was he came back as a heel as opposed to a babyface, and he was like an Iraqi sympathizer, and he was defending Iraq, and I thought it was really good. Even back then, he was the foreign bad guy. It's like when you can't do anything else, go for the foreign bad guy. It's always going to work. And the problem was that there's a storm started to happen. So it started to get a little more real for America. But then so Slaughter won the belt, and they were going to have Hogan come back and challenge him, and Hogan was going to be the great American conqueror, and he's going to defeat the foreign bad guy. So here's where the narrative, and I noticed that the word of this docuseries that I'm using is narrative, because I've said it a lot, but the narrative of, Slaughter was getting death threats, and he probably legit was getting death threats and stuff like that, but they try to say, they were going to do the show at the LA Coliseum, and they were getting death threats, and they couldn't do it, so they had to change venues. The reality was they weren't selling tickets, so they changed venues because of that. And Hogan ended up beating him and taking the title. Bob Costas finally, he shows up on the documentary. He gets more into it later. He kind of just comes in and he's talking about how passe wrestling was and how cliche it was and just like, lowbrow. I don't know. Costas has had a history in wrestling, but he always seems kind of smug. And he always seems like he doesn't like, he hates that he had anything to ever do with it, like announcing or anything like that. But, they started to say Hogan, the audience was starting to get tired of Hogan again around 92-ish. After he had beaten Slaughter. Now it's like, okay, things are you've been there now for about 7 years as this top guy. The audience is starting to get tired of him, and around that time is when the issue started with Dr. Zahorian. So Dr. Zahorian was a physician appointed by the state of Pennsylvania, and the thing now is, he was appointed by the state of Pennsylvania. We didn't use him. He was automatically at the shows, but it was known. They said that it was known he would show up. He would have his briefcase or whatever. The boys would line up. They'd get whatever they wanted off him, their steroids or their painkillers or whatnot. Vince even admitted to buying steroids off of him as well. He was now up for 15 counts of distributing steroids. They said it was okay when steroids were illegal, but then when they became illegal, that's when it became a problem. And he was up for 15 counts of distributing steroids. And they talk about how steroids were just part of the culture. You took steroids to look good. You took steroids to heal your body. And it's funny, the clip they show during this, they talk about, before guys would look like this, and they show Uncle Elmer, and then now they look like this, and the two guys they cut to are Hercules and Warlord, who it's widely known these guys were so roided up. So that was kind of a rib. And so he ended up getting arrested, and as he got arrested, now this is another narrative. The narrative, because again, this is what they're choosing to put out there. They're trying to say that, Vince had started the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. And they're trying to say, that's what kind of made the WBF fold. They were all on steroids. They don't mention that the WBF was a failure. Vince loves bodybuilding. Good for him. He started this WBF. He was going to challenge Joe Weider at the time, who was the big bodybuilding, the magazine. Like, that's when you thought of bodybuilding, that was who you thought of. And he wanted to give all these bodybuilders gimmicks and characters and stuff like that. And he was signing these guys to actual contracts when the wrestlers weren't even getting signed to contracts. And they had a television show on USA. I can't remember ever watching it. And they actually did a pay-per-view. And it didn't make any money. It was a failure. And they don't talk about that. They just say they had to close it up because of steroids. Which, again, revisionist history. So, Zahorian, and when he was testifying, said he sold to Hogan. And he sold steroids to Hogan. And they show Vince kind of going on the offensive about steroids back in the day, saying, like, they're going to do drug tests. WWF is going to be the world. They're going to show the world how you test for drugs. We're going to be the world, we're going to be the ones known for this. And, this, he says the same day, I don't know if it was the same day Hogan goes on Arsenio Hall, and they show the famous clip of Arsenio asking Hogan if he did steroids, and Hogan said no, I never took them. And as soon as he says that, they show clips of like the most bitter people ever, Superstar Billy Graham and Bruno Sammartino, and they're both just blasting Hogan. Bruno's talking about how Hogan took him. Superstar Billy Graham saying how he injected Hogan himself. He taught him how to cycle through the steroids. And then it's so funny because Vince comes on and he says, Hogan probably shouldn't have went on, but he did. He should have just told the truth. It's just so much easier. And it's like, come on, Vince McMahon is saying that? This stuff writes itself. So then Phil Mushnick comes on, and the first time he's on. And if you have watched wrestling over the years, you know the name. The guy has always written articles negative about wrestling. He hates it. But he loves to write about it. It probably gives him... It's probably what he's best... I don't know, to be honest, but it's probably what he's best known for is his anti-stance on wrestling. And he just says, yeah, I hated it. I thought Vince McMahon was a dirtbag. He uses dirtbag, and he would always write about the bad stuff. And then that's where they go right into the Ring Boy scandal. Now, the Ring Boy scandal is mainly you hear the names Mel Phillips, Terry Garvin, and Pat Patterson. And what the Ring Boys is, those are the boys, the underage kids that they would have come, set up the ring, stuff like that, grab the jackets, and do all kinds of stuff like that. And they said that Mel Phillips would sexually abuse these kids. And, Mel Phillips was known like for having a foot fetish. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but they said that he was, Bret Hart was like, he's a known pedophile. And all these guys knew about Mel Phillips. The thing that gets me is, like, why wouldn't anyone do anything about that? Like, why wouldn't any of these guys... Mel Phillips wasn't an important guy, so how could they let this happen if they knew about it? Now, all these guys saying they knew about it now, that just makes them, to me, that makes them look bad. That you knew about it, but you didn't do anything about it. In fact, as we'll talk about Donahue later. I'll talk about Donahue later. I'll mention my point later. But they showed Tom Cole, and he was one that was claiming, Mel Phillips did this stuff with him. And so they talk about how they fired Terry Garvin and Mel Phillips and Pat Patterson. Not Pat Patterson. They resigned. And they don't mention that Mel Phillips came back and they fired him again. It's interesting how they don't mention that. But then they talk about how, I don't think Pat Patterson was involved in it. Pat Patterson was a good guy. He was openly gay in a time when that wasn't accepted, especially in the wrestling business. But they don't think he was involved, and that's when Tom Cole actually comes on and says Pat Patterson was groping him and touching him in certain places. And that's when one of the best lines in the documentary comes on with Tony Atlas. Oh, he grabbed my pecker. And I didn't like Pat Patterson. He was touching me. And they asked Tony Atlas, well, why didn't you complain? It's you could see, here's where you could see the outside person being like, oh my God, I can't believe this. And especially to Tony Atlas's answer. But to us in the know, it is comical. He's like, to who? Who am I going to complain to? And they were like, Vince McMahon. He's just like, ha, ha, ha. He's, about what? Like, he needs Pat Patterson a lot more than he needs me. I'll be the one that gets fired. And it's just, again, how normal it feels to someone like me and how nonchalant it feels to the outside person. I would like to talk to someone who has nothing, doesn't understand this at all, and hear what they think. Because, again, I'm someone that is in the know on all this, and it just doesn't surprise me at all. I want to hear the people who are like, oh my God, and if he complained, he'd be the one that got fired? I guess that would seem crazy, but again, when you know about it, it doesn't. So, Pat Patterson ended up coming back. The other two, no, but they brought Pat Patterson back. Pat Patterson, widely known as one of the greatest minds in wrestling. So, yeah. Then they do show, Phil Mushnick. They talk about how legitimate press wasn't really paying any mind to any of this wrestling stuff, but things like Donahue and Geraldo, they were eating it up. And then they kind of show some clips from the episode of Donahue that Vince McMahon was on. And this is where I was speaking a little bit earlier about the guys that knew stuff back in the day. At one point, Superstar Billy Graham on that episode, he talks about knowing about Mel Phillips and Pat Patterson taking the young boys and not doing anything about it. And it's like, dude, that just makes you look like a scumbag. And I don't want to go too much into the Donahue thing. I think that is a review on its own. And maybe I'll do that after the Vince McMahon thing, because that's a pretty good, interesting watch if you've never seen it. So, yeah, I'll do more on that. But they kind of just touch up on the Donahue thing. And again, I'll do an episode of that. Jimmy Hart comes on, and this is interesting. He comes on, and they ask him a question, and he says, yeah, I mean, it was crazy to know who was running around with who was sleeping with who, and ask him who, and he's like, well, I don't know what they want out there. Now, the thing about that is, at the time, he's saying that, and you're totally like, look, he's protecting people. He's protecting people's names. He's not putting stuff out there. He's not burning any bridges. But at the same time, I believe that these guys that are being interviewed, they might not realize that this isn't a WWF project. So they might not say anything negative about WWF because they think this is a WWF release as opposed to a Netflix release. So I can't really fault him for that. I know people are like, he's just trying to keep things hidden. Eric Bischoff said, like, I wasn't even interviewed for this Vince McMahon documentary. He's like, what happened was I went and did interviews for other projects, and they just put it into this. And you can definitely see that because there's so many of these documentaries that they do that they take clips from either the same interviews from people or actually same clips and put them in other documentaries. So I could definitely see that. Then they get into the next scandal, which is Rita Chatterton, Rita Marie. She was the first ever female referee, and she was supposedly going to get a huge contract. They were going to make her a big star. I'm sorry, I just don't see that. Like, I look at her, I'm not trying to sound mean. I don't think she was like drop dead gorgeous. I'm not saying she was ugly or anything. I don't think that she was this model-esque type that could have been that. But you know, she was the first female ref, and they were going to build something up on that. But then again, you're just a referee. That's one of my problems. That you have Aubrey Edwards in AEW, and she's a good ref, but she puts a lot of the attention on herself. So anyway, she talks about how Vince forced her to have oral sex with him, and her quote was, when she couldn't complete his desires, he got angry, and he would rip off her clothes and said she needed to satisfy him or she'd be blackballed. And I can just picture Vince like, come on, suck it. You could picture him. And then probably the most blasphemous statement in this whole docuseries, Vince comes on and he says, look, it was consensual, and if it had been rape, the statute of limitations had run out. This guy actually said that. That's like saying, if I did rape her, it's too late. And the thing is, like, so, people said she said she waited 5 years till after her parents died. She didn't want her parents to know. Now, this is a thing with stuff like this. A lot of people don't understand it, me included somewhat. There's shame in it, and there's victimizing. Like I did something wrong, even though you're the victim. And there's shame in being raped and stuff like that. And she wanted to wait till her parents died. Supposedly she had told a few wrestlers, Andre the Giant being one. Vince then went on trial. So what happened was he ended up suing her or something, but the statute, when he said the statute of limitations ran up, well, and I think it was in 2022 or right around that time. Well, New York lifted the statute of limitations, and he had to settle with her out of court. So she got paid for it. It took 30 years, but she did get paid for it. Then they finally go into Vince now is going on trial for illegal distribution of steroids, and Mushnick, he's like, I don't know, they got their information maybe from Phil Mushnick. And then Phil Mushnick comes on and he's like, yeah, I was an informant. Now, he wasn't saying he was an informant, but he was saying he was an informant because the FBI were reading his articles and they were going off of what he was writing. And every wrestler says, Vince never told me I need to take steroids. They never specifically said, yeah, you need to take steroids. But he would say, oh yeah, you know what? You got to work out more. Wink, wink. And they all knew what that would mean. Plus, you're in the time you want to be bigger, better, faster, stronger. He could have faced up to 11 years in jail and had to pay a fine, but he ended up fighting it because he said, I didn't do anything wrong. And at the time, he had neck surgery. And the big thing is, well, that was for sympathy. It's kind of like with Tupac, when Tupac was on trial and he ended up getting shot, and they were like, oh, he staged the whole thing. well, we know that wasn't true. And what Vince McMahon, I can go with both thoughts. That it was for sympathy, sure, it could have been, but I don't know what sympathy he would have garnered because he's going up against the federal government. And I also could go with the thought of, look, he's off TV now. He can't have anything to do with the business at the moment because he's fighting this court case. He needs the neck surgery. Now's the time to do it because he doesn't have to take time off for healing because he's already got the time off. So I could see both of those, but I could definitely see him doing it as a work. I mean, he's a wrestler. Wrestlers work everything. So at the time, they go with Hogan. Hogan now leaves the WWF. And now, interestingly, they go with the narrative. Again, there's that word. This is the time Ted Turner wants to make his move when Vince McMahon is down and out. And they bring in Eric Bischoff. And Bischoff says, WCW was number 2, but they might as well have been number 202 because there really was no competition for WWF at all. But, Turner wanted to stop making a move, and Bischoff knew Hogan was at Disney MGM Studios shooting Thunder in Paradise, and you get to hear the same story told the same way in every documentary. Which this will be for the next episode too. The same stuff told the same way, but he went and talked to Hogan. They didn't mention that Ric Flair was the buffer. He was the go-between guy. But Bischoff went and talked to Hogan. They struck a deal. They made a great deal with Hogan, for Hogan. Low appearances compared to what the appearances he was having to make for WWF. Obviously getting paid so much money. And he had creative control. I mean, you probably couldn't get a better deal than what Hogan got. And, they talk about how Hogan, when he left WWF, said he'll never compete against Vince McMahon. And Vince McMahon talks about how he was heartbroken that Hogan left and went to WCW after all the business they had done. And it's interesting because you often hear about when guys leave Vince, and they're the ones that are hurt. That Vince didn't need me anymore. Like mainly like a Bret Hart. He didn't need me anymore. He kind of just threw me, cast me aside. But in this case, you hear Vince saying it. But at the same time, it's like, well, you're not using Hogan. You kind of don't want to use him because of the whole steroid allegation thing. Can this guy not go make money elsewhere? He should be able to go make money elsewhere. You didn't even want to use him. And then they show Shane McMahon, and he comes on and says that's kind of a slap in the face. It's a bit taboo. He still gets mad when he thinks about Hogan leaving, and it makes you think of football when a player leaves a team. It's like, oh, he's a traitor. He left this team to go to this team when he was a free agent, but yet that team can release him or cut him at any point or trade him at any point, and that's fine because it's just business. But when the player does it for themselves, it's selfishness, and that's exactly how this felt to me. And then they just end it with a teaser that Hogan was going to testify against Vince McMahon, and that's kind of the big. Again, you got to end it with a tease, and they end it with the tease of Hogan's going to testify against Vince McMahon. Oh my God, what's he going to say? And Vince McMahon, he was scared, and that's how they end it. So this was a good episode on the scandals. Again, they touched the scandals, but I liken it to walking on the beach, and you got some people just diving in the water, and then you got some people just walking on the shoreline, getting their feet wet, and that's kind of how it is. They dabble in the scandals, but they don't go too far. There's so much more that they could have mentioned, and they didn't. I think that had I made the documentary, I would have wanted to go much further in detail. What do you get to lose? And you already, you could film as many episodes as you want. You could have done a 24 episode thing. So I think that they made a mistake by just dabbling into the scandals. It felt like so far this has just been kind of like a history of things Vince McMahon has done in the business. Like, a lot of it wasn't even him. It was, talking about WrestleMania 3 or it was a good documentary on a couple of the key points of the WWF up until that point. So that's going to end number 2. And you know what? As you can tell by my voice, probably I'm a little under the weather. So hopefully I'll get number 3 out there. I'm trying to get these 6 out in the first 6 days, and then I'll tend to do more like one a week or one every other week. But I want to hit when this, or strike while the iron's hot per se. And I know everyone wants, not because I care about likes and views and all that. I want people who are interested in this, and this is what I want. I want people to come back at me and talk about this. I want to hear an opinion of someone who doesn't watch wrestling. So if that's you out there, write back so we can talk about it. But all right, thank you. This one went a little longer. There's no set time for these episodes. I know the last one was about 33 minutes. I'm looking now. This one went about 46. Oh, and before I forget to go, as I said, I want to end each episode with like a Vince McMahon quote. Sorry. But this one I kind of already did the what I would think that he was doing in November with Rita Marie. Like, come on, suck it. But, this one is a simple one. They show it at the beginning, that hype reel for WrestleMania 3. And he's like, here, to sing America the Beautiful, Miss Aretha Franklin.